Wyoming Territory, August 1879, the day Rosalind Carrington ran into the town of Red Rock barefoot, face streaked with blood and dust. The sun was still high and hot enough to burn through a cotton bonnet. They took her. They took her, she screamed, stumbling straight into the middle of Main Street. Her hands trembled as she gripped the arm of the nearest man. She found Sheriff Colby standing outside the saloon with a mug in his hand. "They took who?" he asked, frowning. "My daughter, my baby girl, and my boy." "They took them from the cabin. Please, please." But as soon as she said it, the whispers started. A few women stepped back, men exchanged glances. Sheriff Colby's face changed like a door slamming shut. "Rosalind," he said slowly, "you do not have any children." She blinked at him, chest heaving. "What?" He crossed his arms. "You came into this town a widow, alone. That is what you told us." "I have 2 children," she cried. "Elia and Everett, they're 6 and 4. They were with me near the river, then I heard a horse, and when I got back, the cabin door was open, and they were gone." Sheriff Colby shook his head. "You're tired. Grief can play tricks. You lost your husband and your baby in Missouri, is that right?" "No," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I had 2 more children after Charles died. I swear to God, they are real, they were here." But no one believed her. Not the sheriff, not the preacher, not even the woman who sold her eggs every Wednesday. They just looked at her like she had gone mad. By sundown, she was sitting outside the abandoned livery, arms wrapped around her knees. She had not stopped crying, not until a shadow fell across her in the dirt. "You from the cabin north of the creek?" asked a voice, male, calm. She looked up. A cowboy stood in front of her, tall and broad-shouldered, with dust on his boots and a rifle slung across his back. His shirt clung to him from the heat, and his dark hair curled slightly at the ends. He looked like he had been riding all day, but his eyes, steady and green, met hers without doubt. "Yes," she whispered. "My name's Vale Ellison," he said. "I believe you." Rosalind stared at him, breath caught in her throat. "Why?" "Because I saw them." She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. "You saw my children," he nodded. 2 kids, a little girl with dark curls. A boy with a scar on his eyebrow. They were in the back of a wagon headed east fast. I was coming down from the ridge when I spotted them." She choked on a sound, half sob, half relief. Her knees buckled and Vale caught her before she hit the ground. "I knew it," she whispered into his shirt. "I knew I wasn't crazy." "You are not," he said gently, steadying her. "I am going after them, and you are coming with me." She looked up at him, dazed. "You would do that?" "I ride alone. No one cares where I go," he said, "but those children looked scared." "And you look like a woman who would die before she gave up on them." "I would," she said, voice trembling. "Then we ride at first light." Vale had a sorrel horse named Barley and a pack already half full. Rosalind had nothing but the clothes on her back. Still, when the morning came, she was ready at the edge of town, hair tied, boots laced, eyes sharp. They rode hard for 2 days. Vale kept his gaze fixed on the trail, pointing out wagon ruts, fading hoofprints, and places where branches had been broken. Rosalind barely spoke, afraid that if she opened her mouth, all her hope would spill out and vanish into dust. On the 3rd night, they made camp near a shallow creek. The moon hung low, and Vale offered her a tin cup of coffee. "Thank you," she murmured. He sat beside her, not too close. The fire between them snapped gently. "I do not know why they took them," she said, voice low. "We have nothing, no land, no money, just each other." "Sometimes that is enough," he replied. She looked at him. "Why did you believe me?" He hesitated. Then said, "Because when you screamed their names, it sounded like truth, and I have heard enough lies in my life to know the difference." She wanted to ask what lies he meant, but the way he stared into the fire told her not to. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for helping me." Vale looked at her then, really looked. "I am not doing this just to help you," she blinked. "Then why?" He looked away, jaw tight. "Because I could not live with myself if I left them out there," and something in her heart cracked open. By the 4th day, they found the burned remnants of a campfire and a child's ribbon caught on a bush. Rosalind's hands shook as she pulled it free. Vale crouched beside it. "We are close." That night she could not sleep. She sat beside the fire, staring into the dark. Vale stirred, then sat up beside her. "Cold?" he asked. "No, just scared," he nodded. "Me too." She looked at him in surprise. I have not cared about someone like this in a long time, he said quietly. It is hard to know what to do with it. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. I am glad I met you, she said, his thumb brushed against her fingers. Rosalind, when we find them, I swear to you, I will not let anything happen to them again. Her voice caught. You mean that? I believe you, forever. She leaned in before she could stop herself. He met her halfway. The kiss was soft and slow, like the first breeze after a storm. And for the first time since her children were taken, she felt something close to peace. They fell asleep beside each other, fingers still twined. At sunrise, they found the wagon. It was camped near a stand of cottonwoods, with two men dozing beside a small fire. The children were tied up near the wheels, huddled together, faces pale. Rosalind's heart stopped. That is them. Vale handed her his knife. Stay behind me. He moved like a shadow, silent and sure. Within seconds, one man was down, the other scrambling. Vale fired a warning shot into the air. Try it, he said flatly, and I will put the next bullet between your eyes. The man dropped his gun. Rosalind ran to her children. Elia, Everett, Mama, they cried. She cut their ropes with shaking hands, pulling them into her arms. I have you, you are safe now. Vale tied the two men up, then turned to her. The smile on his face was small and quiet, but it lit something in her chest. You did it, she whispered. No, he said. We did. They rode away from there with the children between them, the sun rising behind their backs, and for the first time in a long, long time, Rosalind believed in forever. 2 weeks later, the wind had shifted. Cooler now, with the edge of September sharpening the air, it pulled clouds across the sky like pulled cotton. Vale guided Barley through tall grass that had turned brittle and yellow, the children tucked safely behind him on the pack mule Rosalind had named Myrtle. Their journey had bent southward. Rosalind's call. She didn't want to stay near Red Rock. The town had turned its face from her when she'd needed it most. So they followed the foothills, tracing the long shadow of the Wind River Range, the four of them moving slow and careful, searching for a place to begin again. They stopped for the night beneath a rocky rise where a spring bubbled up cold and clear. Rosalind helped Elia peel pine bark from a branch while Everett chased grasshoppers. Vale set the fire with practiced movements, then pulled a strip of salted venison from the saddlebag and cut it into thin slices. I've heard of a valley near South Pass, Rosalind said, folding her skirt beneath her as she sat. Rich soil, water runs year-round, and not many folks. Vale didn't look up. You reckon it's far enough for what? He met her eyes. To be left alone. Rosalind's fingers stilled on the bark. I think it might be. They ate in silence for a stretch, the children chewing with the solemnity of the very hungry. Afterward, Vale walked east with Everett and returned with a rabbit. He skinned it without a word, hands steady, eyes distant. When he was done, he looked toward Rosalind, then away again. She waited until the children were asleep, curled like pups beneath a wool blanket, before she sat beside him. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. You did more than anyone else would have. You owe me nothing. Vale didn't answer right away. He tossed a twig into the fire, watching it blacken. Last year, he said, I watched a family get driven off land they'd worked 5 years. Railroad came through, offered them half what it was worth. When they said no, someone set their barn on fire. The woman lost her youngest in the smoke. Rosalind's breath caught. I helped bury the boy, he continued. Then I rode away, told myself it wasn't my fight, but I haven't slept 2 nights in a row since. She laid a hand on his arm. He didn't flinch from it. You don't run from things anymore, she said. No, he said, not since you. The fire cracked between them, soft and low. He turned his palm up beneath hers. I want to build something, he said. With you, with them. If you'll let me. Rosalind looked over at the bundled shapes of her children, then back at Vale. Her voice was steady. I want that too, he nodded once, then leaned forward, pressing his brow to hers. Not a kiss, just the warmth of skin meeting skin. In the morning, they followed the path of elk tracks until it joined an old wagon trail. By noon, they passed a grove of cottonwoods that whispered in the wind. And by dusk, they came upon a long, gentle valley split by a silver stream, the land open, the silence kind. Rosalind stood beside Vale as the children ran ahead, their laughter bouncing off the hills. "You think this is it?" she asked. He shaded his eyes with one hand. "I do." They camped beneath a stand of aspen that night. While the children slept, Vale unfolded a folded square of paper from his saddlebag and handed it to her. It was a homestead claim form blank but for the county seal. "I picked it up in Lander," he said. "Didn't know if I'd ever use it." Rosalind ran her thumb over the edges. "Whose name goes on it?" "Ours," he said quietly. She didn't speak, but the way she leaned into him told him everything. They would build there slow, careful, and real. And when winter came, they would face it together. Not just two survivors bound by loss, but a family choosing to stay. And for the first time in either of their lives, forever felt like something they could reach. They spent the first 2 weeks clearing brush and pacing the land until it took on the rhythm of their footsteps. Vale found a wide rise above the stream bank where the ground held firm and dry, and they started there. He felled cottonwood and lodgepole pine from the hills above the valley, dragging them down with Myrtle, who had little patience for the work but did it all the same. Rosalind dug a root cellar behind the rise, her palms blistered and raw by the third day. The children helped where they could, Aaliyah gathering kindling, Everett sorting stones from the soil. No one spoke much about what had come before. Not out of avoidance, but because something new was taking shape. At night they lay close under a canvas lean-to, the children tucked between them. Vale always rose first, gathering eggs from the hens he'd traded for in South Pass, then walking the line of their small garden with quiet diligence. Rosalind had planted beans and cabbage. The soil was stubborn, but it yielded. One morning, as mist still clung to the grass, Rosalind stood beside him, pressing the heel of her hand to her lower back. "If you hadn't stopped me that day," she said, watching a rabbit dart into the brush, "I don't know where I'd have gone." Vale didn't answer right away. He ran his fingers along the fence post he'd just set, checking the knot in the twine. "I reckon I would have followed you anyway," he said finally. "Didn't feel like a choice." She turned toward him. "You didn't even know me." "I knew enough." A breeze carried the scent of wet earth between them. Rosalind stepped closer, brushing a fleck of dirt from his forearm. "I don't know how to be in something that lasts," she said. "I've never had that." He met her eyes, steady as ever. "Then we'll learn it together." They kissed with the quiet certainty of people who had stopped looking for reasons. Her hands slipped around his waist and his rested on the curve of her spine. When they broke apart, Rosalind exhaled against his shoulder like she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. By the end of the month, they'd raised 3 full walls of the cabin. Vale notched the beams with care, voice low when he taught Everett how to hold the drawknife. Rosalind stitched curtains from old flour sacks and dyed them with walnut and onion skin. Aaliyah tied a ribbon around the neck of the barn cat who'd wandered in from the hills and never left. One evening, Rosalind stood at the ridge looking out over the valley. The sky was streaked with amber, the land around them green and gold. Vale came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "I used to think peace was something other people got," she said, her voice low. "People with softer lives." He looked out over the rise where Aaliyah and Everett chased shadows. "And now," he asked, "I think maybe it's just something you fight hard enough to keep." Vale didn't speak, but he brought her hand to his mouth, pressing a kiss to the inside of her wrist. She leaned into him as the sun slipped behind the ridge. No promises were made. None were needed. The cabin was finished before the first frost. Inside, the floor was packed earth, but the hearth was strong and the roof held against the wind. Rosalind hung a single photograph above the mantel, her mother's, taken before the war. Vale carved their initials into the doorway, small enough to go unnoticed. That winter, the snow came early, soft and heavy. They kept warm with stories and stew. The children nestled in quilts Rosalind had pieced from scraps. Vale built shelves and mended boots. Rosalind read aloud from a tattered Bible, her voice steady even when the wind shrieked. One night, as the fire burned low, she reached across the quilts and touched his shoulder. "I didn't know men like you existed," she said. He turned toward her, his eyes catching the firelight. "I didn't know I could belong somewhere," he replied. She shifted closer, her fingers brushing the scar on his jaw. "You belong here, with us." He kissed her then, not with hunger but with reverence, like he was learning the shape of something sacred. She answered with the same quiet devotion, hands moving over him with the memory of every mile, every silence, every night she'd clung to hope alone. When morning came, they rose together and stepped out into the snow. The world was white and untouched, the valley hushed beneath its blanket. Elia laughed as she caught flakes on her tongue. Everett threw a handful into the air and shouted just to hear the echo. Rosalind stood in the doorway, Vale's arm around her waist. They had built it, this life, this place, this family, not from ease or comfort, but from choice. And no one could take it from them now. By mid-April, the valley softened under thaw. Meltwater laced the creek with a fast current, and the scent of damp pine carried on the wind. Rosalind stood beside the plot where she'd planted early peas, her skirts wet to the knees, hair pinned high to keep it off her neck. She pressed a palm to the earth, and it pressed back, cool and firm. The land was waking. Behind her, Vale was mending the harness strap Everett had frayed by dragging Myrtle too close to the fence post. The boy had apologized in a whisper, eyes downcast, and Vale had only ruffled his hair and handed him a rasp to smooth the wood instead. Everett took to the task with quiet focus, tongue tucked into one cheek. "You think we'll get a good yield?" Rosalind asked without turning. Vale looked up from the strap, sun catching the line of his cheekbone. "If the frost stays gone and we keep watch for gophers, I'd bet on it." "You make it sound simple." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Nothing simple about it, but you do the work, keep your eyes open, and most times the land answers back." She straightened slowly, brushing soil from her fingers. "That's how you live, isn't it? You wait and you listen." Vale walked to her side, boots leaving prints in the wet ground. "I've had to." Rosalind tilted her head. "You ever want something louder, bigger?" He glanced toward the ridge where the sun was settling low. "I used to. Thought I'd end up somewhere with cattle enough to fill the horizon, but I never figured peace would feel like this." She looked at him then, her expression unreadable, then bent to pluck a stone from the soil. "I never thought I'd live long enough to feel steady," she said. "Not after what I lost." "Not after what they said. You still think about them?" he asked. "Not in the way I did." She turned the stone in her palm. "It's quieter now, doesn't claw so hard." Vale took the stone from her and tossed it into the brush. "You earned that quiet." That night, Vale brought in a cedar shelf he'd built for the hearth. Elia helped him place tin cups along the top while Rosalind stitched patches to the elbows of Everett's shirt. The boy leaned against her knee, half asleep before she tied the final knot. After the children were laid down, Rosalind stepped outside to shake the dust from the quilt. Vale followed, arms crossed, watching her silhouette in the lantern light. "Got a letter from the circuit rider," he said. "Left it with Thompson's boy. He'll be coming through again come June." Rosalind nodded, folding the quilt over her arm. "That soon?" He said if we wanted, he'd marry us then. She looked at him, face open and unguarded. "You asking?" "I'm saying I'd like to wake up beside you every morning, a man with a name you share." "If you want it." She stepped closer, her voice low. "I want to build a life that doesn't tremble when someone knocks at the door. I want your name, Vale." He reached out and touched her cheek, thumb barely brushing the skin. "Then it's yours." They didn't speak again, not with words. He kissed her slowly, the kind of kiss that didn't rush, didn't press, only stayed. Her fingers curled into the wool of his shirt, anchoring herself to the weight of him, to the promise of something that wouldn't be taken. By the end of May, the garden had sprouted rows of green. Elia learned to shell peas without splitting them. Everett watched the trap lines with the solemn pride of a boy learning to walk in a man's shoes. Rosalind hung a strip of lace across the cabin window, and Vale built a bench beneath the aspen where the children read aloud from the battered primer Rosalind had saved from Missouri. One afternoon, as the wind rose warm from the south, she found Vale sanding a cedar plank beside the barn. "I want to teach again," she said, her voice careful. He paused, looking up from the grain. "Here, if there are other children nearby, riders pass through, homesteads beyond the ridge, maybe someone needs a hand." He brushed sawdust from his sleeves. "You'd be good at that." "I want to do more than survive," she said. "I want them to see what a woman can build when no one's trying to silence her." Vale smiled, slow and sure. "Then let's make room for a school bench in the barn." She laughed, surprised by how quickly the idea felt possible. By June, wildflowers dotted the fields. The circuit rider arrived, boots worn but voice kind. They married by the stream, Aaliyah holding a crown of woven clover, Everett standing straighter than he ever had. There was no grand declaration, only the joining of two people who had already chosen each other with every hour, every task, every nightfall. As dusk settled over the valley, Vale took Rosalind's hand and kissed her knuckles, one by one. "You believed me," she said, voice catching. He touched her jaw, his own voice rough. "Forever." And in the hush of that moment, with the children's laughter echoing over the hills and the scent of cedar thick in the air, they stepped into the kind of life neither had ever dared to imagine. A life built not from what was lost, but from everything they still had yet to grow. The barn smelled of hay dust and clean pine, the kind of scent that settled deep in the lungs and reminded Rosalind of the Missouri summers before everything had cracked apart. She stood beside the chalkboard Vale had mounted on the far wall, a stub of white chalk in her hand, the faint sound of Aaliyah and Everett playing outside drifting in through the open doors. The bench Vale had built for lessons had space for 6, maybe 8 if the children were small. She hadn't expected the families beyond the ridge to send their young ones so quickly, but word had traveled. 3 riders had come in the past week, quiet men with tired eyes asking about the school. 2 offered chickens in exchange for reading lessons. 1 brought along his daughter and asked if Rosalind would teach her to write her name. She'd said yes, of course. It wasn't just about books. It was about giving the children something to hold that couldn't be taken, a kind of knowing that stayed. Vale leaned against the doorway now, arms folded. "You look like you're about to preach," he said. "I don't suppose you'd sit for a lesson?" she asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. "Only if you promise not to laugh when I spell neighbor wrong again." She stepped down from the platform and crossed the room. "I wouldn't laugh. Not even a little." She touched the side of his jaw, her voice low. "Not at you." He reached for her hand and held it there against the line of his cheek. For a moment neither spoke. The wind moved through the trees outside, soft as breath. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. She gave a small nod. "It's time." Vale's eyes stayed on hers. "Then we start building in the morning." They had cleared the western slope weeks ago, the soil there loamy and shaded in parts. It would be the best place for the addition. A second structure, simple, with thick walls and a stone hearth where the school could grow and the children could keep warm through winter. That night, after the children were asleep, Rosalind took down the tin box she kept beneath the bed. Inside, folded carefully, were the last of her mother's letters, a pressed wildflower she'd saved from the journey west, and the deed Vale had signed with her name beside his. She added the list of pupils she'd written that afternoon, 4 names, one marked with a star for the girl who'd read her first sentence just that morning. She closed the box and returned it to its place, then climbed beneath the quilt. Vale lay beside her, eyes already closed, one hand resting lightly on her hip. "You think they'll stay?" she asked into the hush. "The families," she nodded. "I think they've been waiting for something to hold to," he said. "Same as we were." She tucked herself closer. "I want them to see this place and know it's safe." "They will," he murmured, "because you're here." In the weeks that followed, the new structure rose with fewer hands but more purpose than any building Rosalind had ever known. Vale's movements were sure, and Everett followed him everywhere now, handing tools without needing to be asked. Aaliyah helped paint the front with white lime wash, her hair tied back with a scrap of ribbon Rosalind had hemmed from an old petticoat. By late summer, the schoolhouse was complete, a single room with wide windows, a small stove, and a bell Vale had found at an abandoned claim and cleaned until it shone. Children came in 2s and 3s, some riding with their fathers, others arriving on foot with baskets of eggs or bundles of wool as payment. Rosalind taught them letters and numbers, yes, but also how to listen, how to question, and how to speak without fear. Vale sometimes sat at the back, boots dusty, one arm slung across the top of a bench, watching her as if she'd conjured something from the air. One evening, as she swept the floor after the last child had gone, Vale stepped inside with a folded scrap of paper. "From the county," he said. "They're asking if you'd consider serving as district teacher." She looked up from the broom. "That's a title, comes with a stipend, too." Rosalind set the broom aside. "I never thought I'd be asked to do something official again." "You're not being asked. You're being recognized." She smiled, slow and quiet. "I'll accept it, but I'm not leaving this valley." He stepped closer, brushing a curl from her temple. "I'd never let you." That night they sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the children chasing fireflies barefoot in the grass. Vale poured her a tin cup of cider and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You remember the first night we camped?" she asked. "I remember the way you held onto hope like it was the only thing keeping you upright." She leaned into him. "It was. You don't have to hold so tight anymore." She looked out over the land they'd made theirs, the fence line stretching straight, the garden full, the schoolhouse standing proud. "I know," she said, "but I still will, because this, all of this. It matters." He kissed her then, slow and full, his hand warm at the small of her back. They stayed there as the stars flickered to life overhead, a family forged not by ease but by choice. By the long path they'd walked, the grief they'd outlived, and the steadfast love they'd built with their own hands. And in the hush between heartbeats the valley held them, quiet, whole, home.